In a world where power demands performance, one man chose to play the greatest role of all: insanity itself. In the tight, crowded streets of Greenwich Village, where Italian immigrants built their little Italy inside the belly of New York, Vincent Louis Gigante was born in 1928. His father pushed a vegetable cart through the streets. His mother raised 5 children in a cramped apartment that smelled of tomato sauce and desperation. The village was a world within a world. Italian was spoken more than English, old country traditions mixed with new world ambitions, and the rules of the street mattered more than the laws of America. Young Vincent wasn't like other kids. He was quiet, intense, with fists that seemed too large for his skinny frame. While other boys played stickball, Vincent trained. He punched walls until his knuckles bled, ran through the streets until his lungs burned, lifted whatever he could find to build muscle on his growing body. Because Vincent Gigante had a dream: to be a boxer, to be a champion, to escape the poverty that suffocated his family. By his late teens, he was fighting in the ring as the Chin, a nickname that would follow him the rest of his life. He was good, fast, and powerful, with a hook that could drop men twice his size. He won fight after fight, building a record, making a name. For a moment, it looked like Vincent Gigante would escape the streets through the ring. But boxing is a brutal sport, and Vincent learned what every fighter learns eventually: you can't punch your way out of everything. After a few losses, after too many hits to the head, after seeing other fighters end up broken and brain damaged, Vincent made a choice. He walked away from the ring, but he didn't walk away from fighting. He just changed the battlefield. In the 1940s and 1950s, Greenwich Village wasn't just an Italian neighborhood. It was Genovese territory. The Genovese crime family controlled everything: gambling, loan sharking, labor unions, the docks, protection rackets. And if you were young, Italian, and tough, you had 2 choices: work for the family or get crushed by it. Vincent chose to work. He started as muscle, collecting debts, breaking bones when people didn't pay. He was good at it, too good. The bosses noticed. Here was a kid who didn't talk much, didn't drink much, didn't brag. He just did the work, efficiently and brutally. No questions, no hesitation, no mercy. In 1957, Vincent got his big break, or his damnation, depending on how you look at it. The boss, Frank Costello, was feuding with a younger, more ambitious mobster named Vito Genovese. Genovese wanted Costello gone, wanted the family for himself, and he needed someone to pull the trigger. He chose Vincent, the Chin, Gigante. On May 2nd, 1957, Vincent waited in the lobby of Costello's apartment building. When Costello walked in, Vincent pulled a gun and shouted, "This is for you, Frank!" and fired. The bullet grazed Costello's skull, leaving a bloody trail but failing to kill him. Vincent ran, disappearing into the night like a ghost. Costello survived, but he got the message. He retired, handing control to Genovese. And Vincent? He became a made man, a soldier in the most powerful crime family in America. But he also became marked. The FBI knew who he was now, knew what he'd done. For the rest of his life, they would be watching. Vincent learned something crucial that night. Violence makes you visible, and visibility is dangerous. From that moment on, he started thinking about how to stay powerful while staying invisible, and that's when the madness began. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Vincent climbed through the ranks of the Genovese family, becoming a capo, then underboss, controlling rackets across New York. He was smart, disciplined, and paranoid in the best way. He understood that the FBI was always listening, always watching, always building cases. Other mobsters got caught on wiretaps, got betrayed by informants, got convicted because they couldn't keep their mouths shut. Vincent decided to try something different, something insane. He started acting crazy. It began small. He'd show up to meetings disheveled, mumbling to himself. He'd pause mid-conversation, staring at nothing. He'd forget names, forget faces, forget where he was. At first, other mobsters thought he was losing it. Maybe the boxing had scrambled his brain. Maybe the pressure was getting to him. But Vincent was just getting started. By the early 1980s, when he officially became the boss of the Genovese family, Vincent Gigante had perfected the act. He wandered the streets of Greenwich Village in a bathrobe, pajamas underneath, slippers on his feet, muttering nonsense to himself. He pissed in public, drooled, shuffled like a broken man. Neighbors called him the Odd Father, half mob boss, half mental patient. The FBI watched him, filmed him, followed him. And they saw exactly what Vincent wanted them to see. A crazy old man who couldn't organize a dinner, let alone a criminal empire. But behind the bathrobe, behind the drool and the muttering, Vincent the Chin Gigante was running the most powerful crime family in America, like a Fortune 500 company. And nobody, not the FBI, not prosecutors, not even his own soldiers at first, could prove otherwise. While Vincent shuffled through the streets in his bathrobe, his empire was generating billions. The Genovese family controlled the waterfront, longshoremen unions, shipping, everything that moved through New York's ports paid tribute to the Genovese family. Construction. Like the other families, they had a piece of every major building project in New York, skimming millions through rigged bids and no-show jobs. Gambling, numbers rackets, illegal casinos, sports betting. Vincent's people controlled the action from Harlem to Brooklyn. Labor unions, Teamsters, construction workers, service employees. If they had a union card, Vincent had a piece of their paycheck. Drug distribution. Though Vincent publicly despised drugs, the family moved massive amounts of powder and dope through networks that stretched across the East Coast. Loan sharking. High-interest loans that destroyed families and businesses, creating a cycle of debt that fed the family's coffers. But Vincent ran it differently than other bosses. He never used phones, too easy to tap. He never met in social clubs, too easy to bug. Instead, he held meetings while walking through the village, moving constantly so surveillance teams couldn't set up equipment. He used hand signals, coded phrases, and layers of intermediaries. Orders traveled through captains, through soldiers, never directly from him. And when the FBI came knocking, when prosecutors tried to build cases, Vincent would show up to court in his bathrobe, drooling, confused, barely able to speak. His lawyers would present psychiatric evaluations, showing severe mental illness, dementia, schizophrenia. Judges would look at this shuffling, mumbling old man and think, this guy couldn't run a lemonade stand, let alone a crime family. Case dismissed, charges dropped, investigation closed. Vincent Gigante was playing the greatest con in American criminal history, and winning. Every morning, Vincent would wake up in his mother's apartment. Yes, he lived with his mother, and begin his performance. He'd put on his bathrobe, shuffle to the bathroom, then head out into the streets. Neighbors would see him wandering around, talking to himself, sometimes stopping to stare at a wall for 20 minutes. Local shopkeepers knew the routine. "Morning, Chin," they'd say, and he'd grunt or mumble something incomprehensible. Kids would run past him, and he'd shuffle aside like a confused old man. He'd go to the same coffee shop, order the same espresso, pay with crumpled bills pulled from his bathrobe pocket. He looked like a homeless person, like someone who needed help, not someone who controlled an empire. But here's what the neighbors didn't see. The midnight meetings in the back rooms of cafes, the coded conversations during those shuffling walks, the respect, no, the fear, in the eyes of the men who approached him. They didn't see the capos bringing envelopes of cash, the soldiers seeking permission for hits, the politicians and union bosses who came for favors. They saw a crazy old man. Vincent saw reflections in windows, FBI agents in parked cars, surveillance cameras on street corners. And he played his role perfectly, every moment of every day, never breaking character where he could be seen. His family, his real family, his wife and children who lived separately from him, they knew the truth. His mistress, Olympia, who lived nearby and bore him children, she knew. His top lieutenants knew. But everyone else? They saw the odd father, the crazy man in the bathrobe, and they dismissed him. That dismissal was his power. In the 1980s, when the FBI launched the commission trial to take down all 5 families at once, Vincent Gigante sat at the center of it all, and yet remained untouchable. While bosses like Tony Dux Corallo and Paul Castellano got caught on wiretaps, while Fat Tony Salerno took the spotlight as the supposed Genovese boss, Vincent stayed in the shadows. Fat Tony, Anthony Salerno, was the front, the decoy boss. He held court at the Palma Boys social club, smoked cigars, gave orders, acted like the stereotypical mob boss. The FBI focused on him, wiretapped his club, followed his every move. And when the commission trial came, Fat Tony was indicted as the Genovese family boss. But he wasn't. Vincent was. Vincent had set it up perfectly. He let Fat Tony have the title, the attention, the spotlight, while he, the chin, pulled the strings from behind the scenes. It was brilliant. The FBI thought they were taking down the Genovese leadership when they convicted Fat Tony. But they were just removing Vincent's puppet while the puppeteer remained free. While the commission trial destroyed the other family's leadership, Vincent's Genovese family emerged stronger, more organized, more disciplined, because they had something the others didn't. A boss the government couldn't touch. The Oddfather wasn't just surviving, he was winning. But every performance has its limits. Every mask eventually slips. And by the early 1990s, the FBI was no longer buying Vincent's act. They had been watching him for decades now, and patterns were emerging. Yes, he shuffled around in his bathrobe during the day. But where did he go at night? Why did known mobsters keep accidentally running into him during his walks? Why did major family decisions align perfectly with the timing of his movements? The FBI started deploying new tactics. They put surveillance teams on him 24/7, watching not just Vincent, but everyone around him. They brought in psychiatrists to review his behavior, looking for inconsistencies. They analyzed hours of footage, looking for moments when the mask slipped. And they found them. Footage of Vincent checking over his shoulder before entering buildings. Something a paranoid mob boss would do, not a demented old man. Footage of him moving with purpose and clarity when he thought no one was watching. Footage of meetings where his confusion suddenly vanished when discussing business. Most damning, they caught him on hidden cameras inside social clubs, standing straight, speaking clearly, giving orders with the authority and clarity of a CEO. No bathrobe, no shuffle, no confusion, just Vincent Gigante, mob boss, running his empire. The mask was cracking, and the FBI knew it. In 1991, something happened that would shake the entire mob world. Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, underboss of the Gambino crime family, flipped. He became an informant, testifying against John Gotti and revealing the inner workings of the commission, the five families, the entire structure of New York organized crime. And he talked about Vincent Gigante. Sammy testified that Vincent wasn't crazy, that the bathrobe act was exactly that, an act. He described meetings where Vincent was sharp, commanding, making decisions about murders, rackets, territory disputes. He explained how the Genovese family used Fat Tony as a front while Vincent ran everything from the shadows. For the first time, the FBI had an insider confirming what they'd suspected for years. The Oddfather was a fraud. But testimony alone wasn't enough. The Justice Department needed more. They needed to catch Vincent in the act, to prove beyond reasonable doubt that he was capable of running a criminal organization. And that meant penetrating the Genovese family's tight security, breaking through Vincent's layers of protection. It took years. But they were patient, because they knew that Vincent's greatest strength, his discipline, his paranoia, his refusal to use phones or meet in obvious places, was also his weakness. It made him isolated, dependent on a small circle of trusted lieutenants. And if one of them flipped, that's exactly what happened. In the 1990s, several of Vincent's top people started cooperating with the FBI. Not because they wanted to, but because the alternative was life in prison. The RICO laws had changed everything. Now, just being part of a criminal organization was enough to convict you, even if you never personally committed violence. These cooperators described a sophisticated operation run by a man who was anything but insane. They detailed meetings where Vincent discussed murders of rival mobsters and suspected informants, multi-million-dollar construction rackets, control of labor unions through intimidation and bribery, drug distribution networks despite his public opposition to narcotics, payoffs to police, politicians, and judges. They described his hand signals, his coded language, his elaborate security protocols. They explained how Vincent would test people by acting confused, watching their reactions to see if they'd take advantage of a weak boss. Those who did never got a second chance. The testimony was devastating. But Vincent still had one card to play: his psychiatric defense. Even with all this evidence, he could argue that he was mentally ill, that he believed he was running an empire but was actually delusional, that his orders were the ravings of a sick mind. His lawyers prepared for the fight of their lives, because if they lost, Vincent Gigante would die in prison. In 1997, Vincent Gigante was finally indicted on racketeering charges that included conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, and labor racketeering. The trial was a media circus. Every day, Vincent would shuffle into court in his bathrobe, pajamas, and slippers, looking confused and frail. He'd mumble to himself, sometimes falling asleep during testimony, other times staring blankly at the ceiling. His lawyers argued he was mentally incompetent to stand trial, that putting him through this process was cruel and unusual punishment. They presented psychiatric experts who diagnosed him with dementia, schizophrenia, severe depression. They showed footage of him wandering the streets, pissing in public, talking to himself. But the prosecution was ready. They brought their own psychiatrists who had reviewed thousands of hours of surveillance footage. They pointed out inconsistencies. Vincent's confusion was selective. He remembered details about money but forgot names of family members. His shuffle changed depending on who was watching. Purposeful when alone, exaggerated when FBI agents were near. His random wanderings always ended at locations where known mobsters happened to be. Most devastatingly, they played secret recordings from inside social clubs where Vincent was clear, articulate, and commanding. They showed footage of him checking his surroundings before entering buildings, behavior consistent with someone avoiding surveillance, not someone who was demented. The prosecution made a simple argument. Vincent Gigante is the greatest actor in American history, and he's been performing for 30 years to avoid prosecution. Don't let him fool you the way he's fooled everyone else. The jury deliberated for 5 days, and on July 25, 1997, they came back with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Vincent Gigante, the odd father, the man in the bathrobe, the supposed madman who had evaded justice for decades, was convicted of running a criminal enterprise. The mask had finally been torn away. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. The performance was over. They sent him to the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri, the same facility where Tony Ducks had died. Vincent continued the act for a while, shuffling through the prison, muttering, acting confused. But prison is different from the streets. In prison, everyone's watching, everyone's calculating, everyone's looking for weakness. And Vincent was getting old, really old. The act that had sustained him for decades was becoming harder to maintain. His health was failing. Real health problems now, not fake ones. Heart disease, breathing problems, the accumulated damage of 80 years of life, 40 years of stress. In 2003, something remarkable happened. Vincent Gigante, the man who had fooled America for 3 decades, finally told the truth. In a deal with prosecutors, he admitted it. He admitted that the mental illness was a ruse, that the bathrobe and slippers were a costume, that he had been acting the entire time. In a sworn statement, he confessed, "I misled the court. I portrayed myself as mentally ill when I was not." Why? Why break character after 30 years? Because his son, Vincent Esposito, his son with his mistress Olympia, had been indicted on racketeering charges. And the only way to help him, to possibly reduce his sentence, was to admit the truth and cooperate, even just a little. After a lifetime of silence, of discipline, of never breaking, Vincent Gigante broke for his son. Love destroyed what the FBI never could. The greatest criminal performance in American history. The admission made headlines worldwide. Oddfather admits he faked insanity, the newspapers screamed. But by then, Vincent was too sick, too old, too broken to care. The empire was gone, his family was scattered, and he was dying in a prison hospital. On December 19, 2005, Vincent the Chin Gigante died in prison. He was 77 years old. The official cause was heart disease, but really, he died of what kills all old mobsters: time, stress, and the accumulated weight of a lifetime of violence. There was no mob funeral, no parade of black cars through Greenwich Village, no soldiers standing at attention, just a quiet burial, family only, no spectacle. The man who had spent decades seeking invisibility got what he wanted in the end: a quiet exit, barely noticed. The Genovese family continued without him, weakened but still functioning. New bosses took over, younger guys who didn't remember Vincent's prime, who knew him only as the crazy old man in the bathrobe. the streets of Greenwich Village moved on. The social clubs were shut down or converted into restaurants. The old-timers died or went to prison. The world changed. But Vincent's legend survived because he had done something no one else could. He beat the system for 30 years. He turned madness into a weapon, insanity into a shield. He proved that in America, where everyone's watching, the best place to hide is in plain sight. Was it genius, or was it just a desperate man doing whatever it took to avoid prison? Maybe it was both. Maybe genius and desperation are the same thing when you're facing life behind bars. What does it take to fake mental illness for 30 years? To never break character, never slip up, never forget that you're supposed to be crazy? Psychologists who studied Vincent's case say it requires something rare: complete discipline, absolute commitment, and a willingness to sacrifice your public identity. Most people can't do it. Most people need to be seen as competent, as powerful, as respected. Their egos won't allow them to appear weak or crazy. But Vincent understood something profound. Power doesn't require recognition. In fact, recognition is dangerous. The mobsters who needed to be seen as bosses, John Gotti in his expensive suits, Paul Castellano in his mansion, they got taken down because their egos made them visible. Vincent's ego worked differently. He found power in invisibility, strength in perceived weakness. He was willing to be laughed at, mocked, dismissed, because dismissal was freedom. When you're not taken seriously, you're not watched seriously. And when you're not watched seriously, you can do anything. But there was a cost. His children grew up with a father who was either absent or pretending to be insane. His wife lived separately from him. His mistress had to hide their relationship. He couldn't celebrate victories, couldn't acknowledge his power, couldn't enjoy the fruits of his empire publicly. He was trapped in his own performance. Was it worth it? He stayed out of prison for an extra 30 years, died with his family around him instead of alone in a cell like so many other bosses. By that measure, yes, it was worth it. But he died having admitted he'd been lying for decades, having confessed that his entire public identity was a fraud. His grandchildren will grow up knowing their grandfather was not the confused old man. He was a mob boss who faked mental illness. His legacy is built on deception. Is that a price worth paying? Only Vincent could answer that, and he took the answer to his grave. For the FBI, Vincent Gigante was the one that got away, until he didn't. Agents who worked organized crime in New York during the 1980s and 1990s tell stories about the Chin, with a mixture of frustration and admiration. They knew he was running the Genovese family. They knew the bathrobe was an act. But knowing and proving are different things. They'd follow him for months, build cases, present evidence, and then he'd shuffle into court looking like a dementia patient, and judges would dismiss the charges. One former FBI agent said, "We'd watch him on surveillance, see him giving orders, see the other mobsters treating him with respect, see the operation running smoothly, and then he'd walk out onto the street and suddenly he's pissing himself and talking to lampposts. It was infuriating. You wanted to admire the discipline even as you wanted to lock him up." The Bureau tried everything. Long-range surveillance, hidden cameras, informants, wiretaps on everyone around him. They assembled teams of psychiatrists to analyze his behavior. They reviewed decades of footage looking for patterns. They offered deals to his lieutenants, trying to flip someone close to him. It took years, but they finally got him. The key was patience, waiting until they had enough evidence that no judge could ignore, enough testimony from cooperators that the act became obviously false, enough footage showing consistency in his inconsistencies. When they finally convicted him, FBI agents who'd spent their careers chasing him through a party. They'd caught the white whale, the ghost who'd haunted them for decades. But even in victory, there was respect. Because Vincent Gigante had done what no other mob boss could. He'd made fools of the FBI for 30 years. Today, if you walk through Greenwich Village, you can still find old-timers who remember the Chin shuffling through the streets in his bathrobe. Some of them still believe he was actually crazy. Others shake their heads and laugh. We all knew he was faking, but what could you do? He committed to it. The social clubs where he held meetings are gone, replaced by trendy restaurants and boutique shops. The apartment where he lived with his mother is now worth millions, occupied by bankers and tech workers who have no idea a mob boss once shuffled through those halls. But Vincent's legacy isn't in buildings or locations. It's in the lesson he taught. that perception is reality, that the greatest defense is being underestimated, that you can hide an empire behind a bathrobe if you're committed enough. Other criminals tried to copy his act, faking mental illness to avoid prosecution. None of them succeeded the way Vincent did. Because it wasn't just about putting on a bathrobe. It was about complete commitment. About living the lie every moment of every day. About being willing to sacrifice your public identity for private power. The Genovese family still exists, diminished but functioning. They still control some rackets, still collect some tributes, still operate in the shadows. But the era of powerful, disciplined bosses like Vincent is over. The FBI won, RICO worked, the old ways died. And yet, in law schools and FBI training academies, they still teach about Vincent Gigante. They show the footage, analyze the strategy, study the psychology. Because he represents something important: the limits of surveillance, the power of perception, the difficulty of prosecuting someone who understands the game better than you do. Vincent, the Chin Gigante, died in prison, admitted his fraud, lost his empire. But he won the game for longer than anyone else. And in the world of organized crime, where everyone eventually loses, lasting 30 years longer than your enemies counts as victory. Strip away the bathrobe, the shuffle, the performance. Who was Vincent Gigante really? He was a kid from Greenwich Village who learned that the world belongs to those who are willing to fight for it, legally or illegally. He was a boxer who realized that the most important fight happens outside the ring. He was a mobster who understood that real power does not announce itself. It whispers while everyone else is shouting. But most importantly, he was an actor who never broke character, who committed to his role so completely that even his enemies couldn't tell where the performance ended and the man began. He turned weakness into strength, mockery into invisibility, madness into method. Did he destroy lives? Yes. Did he corrupt institutions? Absolutely. Did he make his fortune from the suffering of others? Without question. Vincent Gigante was a criminal, a killer, a man who built his empire on exploitation and violence. But he was also brilliant. And that's what makes his story so compelling, so troubling. Because we want our criminals to be stupid, easy to catch, obviously evil. Vincent Gigante was none of those things. He was smart, disciplined, strategic, and he almost got away with it forever. In the end, love destroyed what the FBI couldn't. He broke his silence to protect his son, admitted his fraud to help his family. After 30 years of perfect performance, the actor finally became human. And maybe that's the real lesson, that everyone breaks eventually. Not from pressure, not from surveillance, not from prosecution, but from the people they love. Vincent Gigante, the man who fooled America, couldn't fool his own heart. He walked the streets in a bathrobe, talking to ghosts. But the only ghost was him, haunting an empire that no longer existed, performing for an audience that stopped believing. The Oddfather wasn't crazy. He was just committed to a role that demanded everything and gave nothing back.